Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. This week, we're going to ring in the new millennium with Kathryn Bigelow's Strange Days. But first, a couple calls to action this week. Our Q&A episode, we're open for questions. There's a post on GenreVision.com. You can go there, submit your questions through the comments. You can also contact us with the contact page on GenreVision.com. Ask us anything and everything. We are totally open. It can be about the show. It can be about movies. It can be about literally anything. Submit those questions. We want them. We love them. These Q&A episodes are always fun.
The next one we're doing is in July, so please submit sometime before then.
We wanted to mention on Patreon, we have a new patron, Adam. I think we can reveal it's your good friend, Adam, who used to do the show Hollywood on Tap with you.
That's right. He was my very first co-host for any podcast I ever did. Adam Wachtel, you are family to me, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and Adam has a particular treat now that he's a Patreon subscriber because he has access to all of our wonderful bonus content on there. We just did an extended Currently Consuming. We do one of those every month. Basically just kind of collecting together all the stuff that we didn't have time to do for regular Currently Consuming episodes. And there's a moment in the one for April 2019. I think Travis will agree. It is the most he and I have ever broken down laughing doing this show.
Oh, yeah. You and I just completely lost our shit. And if you want to hear that, the best way to do that is to do what Adam did and go to patreon.com/GenreVision. Sign up to be a premium subscriber for $5 a month, and you'll be able to hear that along with a whole bunch of other stuff. It's over 24 hours worth of content, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah, because it gives you access to not only GenreVision stuff, but all the bonus content for our other shows, FinFlix and Third Time's the Charm. Speaking of Third Time's the Charm, just want to remind everybody, our new episode of the show Danny and I are doing about third movies is up, about Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. And we'll be having another one coming out. It's every 2 weeks. And our next one's going to be on The Return of the King. So I hope you guys will check that out. All right. We're continuing VR month with Strange Days. And Strange Days, I mean, we rooted around a lot of movies when we were talking about what to do for VR month. And Strange Days, it qualifies, but it's a very different kind of VR than we've dealt with in our previous movies that we've done.
In Virtuosity, virtual reality was kind of like it is portrayed here, in that as a product that is kept underground, used by the government. In other VR stories, it's something that a consumer gets to use or something that a scientist gets to use. And it's not something that is illegal or kept as a commodity away from people because it could be dangerous. In Strange Days, that's exactly what happens. Virtual reality develops as a program that is essentially the equipment of like police body cams. It was designed to be this something that was worn on the head under a hairpiece. Like it was meant to replace the body wire for police. And for whatever reason, it leaked out to the public and it went onto the black market and is banned. This VR technology is basically like a little spider-like device that you put on top of your head. It's called a squid, which stands for, what does that stand for? Did you write it down? Did you take that note?
Oh, of course not. Like, it's a squid. That's all.
Yeah. Superconducting quantum interference device. Thank you very much. And so you put a squid on your head. The squid plugs into like a little deck that you insert a clip into. The clip is basically a Sony mini disc. You insert the clip into there and you experience, whatever thing was recorded through somebody's eyes as if it were happening to you in real time.
Right. And you actually, it's not just viewing, like you experience the feelings. It is like it is happening to you. It's 100% a sensory experience. And I think it's kind of cool. We didn't intend this when we were picking out these movies, that we've been dealing with, I think, different types of virtual reality and how those different kinds of virtual reality change or are specifically crafted for the kind of story they're going to tell. But before we get into the actual story of Strange Days, I think it's very important to note both the people behind this and the time that it came out, because this is directed by Kathryn Bigelow, who, has gone on to be incredibly successful, with stuff like Zero Dark 30 and The Hurt Locker.
Oh, also, didn't she friggin' direct the best surfing Keanu movie of all time? Come on.
I was going to get to that because she directed Point Break. I think that's 3 or 4 years before Strange Days. Basically, it's her other theatrical feature before Strange Days. So Point Break is a big hit, critically very loved. James Cameron, this is around the time I believe they were romantically involved.
Yeah, around that time.
And James Cameron is coming off of Terminator 2. Like, at the time, I think it was the biggest domestic box office earning movie ever, possibly worldwide. I don't know. I didn't do that research, but it's Terminator friggin' 2. So this was an idea that Strange Days this was an idea that he had kicking around since 1986 when he first started to develop it as a script. And these worlds collide. Kathryn Bigelow is doing very well. James Cameron is the king of movies, and they are finally in a position to make Strange Days. And this is the kind of movie that as soon as it booted up, I realized that there is no way that this movie ever gets made unless you have the kind of combined clout that both Bigelow and Cameron had at the time, because Strange Days is an exceedingly weird movie, but it's also incredibly classical structure-wise.
It's very, very classically noir. It is, I guess, what you would call a tech-noir, but it trades in basic noir structure and noir archetypal characters. The other big name involved in the conception of this movie, at least from the writing stage, is Jay Cox, who is the screenwriter who's worked with Scorsese on Silence and Gangs of New York and Age of Innocence and so forth. Mm-hmm. So certainly some big names behind the camera on this one, and some very big names in front of the camera. Ralph Fiennes, Angela Bassett, Juliette Lewis, Tom Sizemore, Vincent D'Onofrio, Michael Wincott. The list goes on.
Fichtner.
Yeah, gotta love Fichtner.
He's making another appearance in VR month. So, yeah, I mean, this had a very sizable budget for the time. I know it was pretty critically mixed and was pretty much a box office failure.
Yes, and an extraordinarily expensive film to make. I mean, if you look at this movie, there's a lot of really expensive effects sequences because so much of the film is shot in POV.
Right.
Like the opening sequence of the film is in POV, and they're pulling a lot of the same kind of gags that you saw in the Maniac remake, the Frank Calhoun Maniac remake, where they had to fake...
Oh, that's a much better pull.
Yeah, they had to fake the actor's hands being in front of the camera, so often there would be somebody playing the right hand and somebody playing the left hand. Like, you can't mount a cinema camera on somebody's head. It just doesn't work right with the perspective. So... the opening of this movie is a POV shot of a criminal, somebody involved in some sort of robbery, and they're sitting in the back seat of a car. But then you realize, like, oh, there had to be a camera operator operating handheld on 35 millimeters, so a big camera in the back of this car, and then they have to get out of the back of the car in a single take. So they had to build the car specifically to do that gag, and then the list of gags to keep this single shot going goes on and on and on. And if you know to look for the kind of giveaways, like, they're so well done.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm really glad you mentioned the Maniac remake, because my comparison was friggin' Hardcore Henry.
Well, Hardcore Henry is something that they could do with consumer-level cameras.
Right,
so that's
right,
way
exactly.
different. You can mount a consumer-level camera or like a GoPro on somebody's body fairly easily.
Right.
But to do something with a big 35-millimeter camera... different ball of wax.
Well, and from the research I did, that's where a lot of the budget for this was for these, extended POV shots, which are supposed to be the recordings from the Squid device, and we see what people are experiencing. And this extended opening sequence with a robbery, it gets the idea in really well, like right away. You're like, oh, okay, somehow they're recording this, and when the robbery goes afoul and the person that's recording it tries to jump from one rooftop to another and falls to his death, and then boom, we realize it's Ralph Fiennes' character. What's it? Nero?
Lenny Nero.
Lenny Nero is watching this thing. He's like, whoa. And he gets jolted out of it. Like, oh, okay. So from a filmmaking aspect of storytelling, sold on the idea right away.
Yeah. So they give you the basic concept immediately of Lenny is this character who is actually watching this POV experience, and the wearer of the recording device dies when he falls off a roof. That roof jump, by the way, is an incredible gag. I have no clue how they did it. Mm-hmm. But when he's jolted out of it, we see him, Ray finds as Lenny interacting with this dealer, this other guy who you might actually remember as one of the henchmen from the Super Mario Brothers movie.
That's right.
So he's talking to him and says, I don't deal blackjack clips. Okay, so clips are basically this drug that give people an emotional, physical high just by experience them. So you get to experience the adrenaline rush and the high of this criminal committing this act. But because it's a snuff thing, like you get to actually experience what it's like for this guy to die. And these are called blackjack clips. And it's viewed as really immoral to deal in them. It's basically snuff films.
Well, I was so impressed from a scripting level that they are able to make all of the gobbledygook dialogue sound surprisingly natural. Like you're talking about all this terminology like blackjacks and
clips and squids and blackjacks. Yeah, for whatever reason, they actually managed to make it sound organic.
Yeah, and obviously that's a combination of good script writing and good acting. Like the actors make you believe that it's natural for them to say these things. So that's always, I'm not like patently against gobbledygook in science fiction, because obviously you can make it work, but it's a difficult thing to do without it sounding goofy. And Strange Days does that. Like I believe the lingo of this world.
Sure. Strange Days could have easily been the kind of movie that opens with a title card that says, the year is 1999.
Yep, exactly.
Gangs have overrun Los Angeles and squids are, blah, 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 like Blade Runner. But
I was going to say Judge Dredd. You have much better polls than me tonight.
Oh, well, why, thank you. Anyway, they avoid all that kind of expository work and instead do their best to set the film up organically. There is a scene a little bit later where Lenny goes to meet a potential customer who is a wealthy guy. I forget, he must work in entertainment or the record business or something like that. And he's never done clips before. He's never used clips as a drug. So Lenny is sort of introducing him to the idea. And so this is the scene where we get a little bit more lingo. Is, have you ever jacked in? Have you ever wire tripped? And they actually talk about the origins of the squid and, how it was a government program that leaked to the black market and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most obvious scene for the audience to be straight up told what everything is. But like you're saying, it feels organic. Like it doesn't feel shoved in like some opening text might.
Sure. But one of the reasons that this dialogue in this movie feels organic is that the movie is a noir. So it gets away with having dialogue that's a little bit more arch and a little bit more poetic than your average mystery film. But because it's embracing noir structure, it gets away with having noirish dialogue.
Oh yeah, it's allowed to be two-fisted because even though this is a movie set in a not too distant future at the time, set in 1999 on New Year's Eve, the world doesn't look future-y, except we have these little tiny bits of technology that have become a regular part of a certain section of the populace. But at the end of the day, Strange Days is a tawdry piece of crime mystery fiction. And the science fiction stuff creates a very interesting idea to insert into a typically tawdry piece of crime mystery fiction, which is that, you've got these things that can record what people see and sense and everything. Well, let's make somebody do that and be a killer. And then it's like, okay, there's a mystery. Who's this killer using the squid and everything? But Strange Days is not just interested in being that simple. This is a movie that is very close to 2.5 hours. And Strange Days has a lot on its mind.
Right. It's not just a simple murder mystery noir about a detective and a femme fatale and a shady executive and cops. It is actually a very vast political statement, or at least attempts to be. So when it tries to do that stuff, it's certainly not as successful as it is being a noir, and we'll get there. But all the setup that it has to do to actually build the world organically, is one of the things that makes the movie as long as it is. There is literally an hour of setup in the film. The first act, before the inciting incident of the murder mystery, is an hour long. It's a lot.
It is a lot, and I was surprised that I didn't find that to be as daunting, because I'd seen this movie once before a long time ago, and the few things I remembered from it were not like, I didn't remember that it kicked off with it's a killer using this thing, and we got to find out. And Lenny Nero, who is, now this black market dealer of clips, he used to be a former cop, but he got, booted off the squad, and now he's become really grungy, and Ralph Fiennes is really perfect in the role. Like, I mean, I gotta say, I think it's fair to say almost across the board, casting's on point.
It is. Like, even Juliette Lewis, who has to be like cast in a certain right role. Like, this is not an insult about Juliette Lewis. I think she's a great actress, but like, it certainly takes a specific kind of role for her. She's not like a chameleon.
No, and I think she's also she needs the right director.
Absolutely.
I think she is somebody that, you put her like in Cape Fear with Scorsese, like she's great in that movie.
Sure. And she's pretty good in From Dusk Till Dawn as well.
Oh, absolutely. And Strange Days, she is playing the very archetypical, sultry singer. But because this is Los Angeles 1999 and there is a feeling of apocalypse, she's, of course, like this, like post-grunge rock and roller.
Yeah, and she, I believe, does all her own singing for the film. At least that's what I read on IMDb trivia.
And it definitely sounded like her. And I will say, there's a scene where, because Lenny and Juliette Lewis's character, Faith, they used to be a couple. And we see very early on that Lenny, pretty much at the end of the day, he ends his day by watching or experiencing old clips of when him and Faith were together, because Lenny used to record tons of stuff. And it's clear that this can become addicting, and he is becoming addicted to these memories of Faith. And now they're not together. And he goes to her club because she's singing, and he wants to confront her and try and win her favor in some way. And he watches her sing. That was the one scene in that first hour that I felt was a little too long. It really lingers on her performance.
You know what sequence is also, I think, a little unnecessarily long is when Lenny is getting drunk on vodka and watching that clip of Faith and him having sex at that beach house or whatever it is. It's like, that lasts so long, and it's like, we get it, man. You loved her.
No, absolutely.
That scene didn't need to be that long. Case in point, look at Minority Report, which has pretty much the same exact scene. Anderton comes back to his apartment, gets high on drugs, and reminisces about his family, like experiences memories of his family. So this is an archetypal noir scene. You ever play the Max Payne games? I mean, the Max Payne games know that kind of material, and they're drawing on the same kind of material that these kinds of films have been drawing on for decades.
Mm-hmm. No, it's absolutely just, it's old material dressed up in a new, squiddier package.
Yeah.
And that's fine, because I really like the noir stuff, because it is familiar, but you've got a great cast, and the setting of this is really what initially makes Strange Days very interesting and very potentially radical, because it's New Year's Eve 1999, and LA seems like it's on the brink of exploding in terms of racial violence. There is this artist, this singer, Jericho 1.
He's a rapper activist.
Yes, and he is managed by Faith's new boyfriend, played by Michael Wincott.
Yeah, guy named Philo Gant, which is it's like a Cronenberg character name.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, Lenny Nero, Faith, Mace is the name of Angela Bassett's character.
Well, Nero is pretty easy to figure out why they called him Nero, because Nero was fiddling while Rome burned. That's the apocryphal story.
Of course.
And there's a monologue how they talk in this movie, like, oh, Lenny, you're just, basically rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic while this whole thing goes down, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. So not subtle, but works. But so there's this rapper activist, Jericho 1, who, when the movie starts, he has been shot and killed in a supposed gang dispute. But then throughout this first hour of the movie, there is this hooker that knows Nero, because the tricks of the trade have now become for hookers to wear squids when they go out and work, because then they can sell those recordings.
Right. So this one prostitute, Iris, is Lenny's friend, and she commonly deals her clips to him.
Yes, and then we see her being chased by two police officers, played by D'Onofrio and William Fichtner, and she is trying to get something to Lenny, and then she turns up dead. And you're like, okay, all right, so what's going on here? And this whole backdrop of the social upheaval that's going on in LA, that people are seeing, this New Year's is the end of the world. Of course, we get a bunch of, Lenny listening to the radio in his car, some people being like, oh, you need to pray because the world's going to end at midnight and all this. This backdrop is very interesting. And this is definitely a movie you have to understand when it's made. Like, this is, just a couple years after the LA riots. This is definitely drawing upon Rodney King. This was released at the tail end of the O.J. Simpson trial. LA was in a very volatile place when this movie was being made, and the movie is trying to reflect that.
Right. It's an extraordinarily reactionary movie. We'll get to how it handles all those things later on, because the third act is sort of all about that. And the two plots, the noir plot and then this idea of this impending race war, basically collide in the third act. And they're all about that. So at one point, Lenny meets up with two of his friends, Mace, who's played by Angela Bassett, who is, of course, Angela Bassetting everywhere, and she's always a pleasure to watch.
She's fucking so good. I could watch Angela Bassett be angry like for 2 hours. She's so good at it.
Pretty much. And then there's Tom Sizemore, who plays a character named Max, and Max has a very big, ugly wig on.
Well, I mean,
he's Tom Sizemore in a big, long. It's like Bruce Spence's wig from Matrix Revolutions.
I was gonna be much less kind and say it's like Kate Mara's wig in Fantastic Four, but
yikes!
It's very noticeably a wig.
Yeah,
but Tom Sizemore, I know he has a reputation both off and on camera, but he's always so fun and clearly likes playing these kind of characters that he became known for. And Max is another old friend of Lenny's that was on the force. But the first time we meet him, when they're in a bar, he talks about, hey, I'm, having to take kind of gigs in the underground circuit because I got a bullet in my head and that took me off the force and I'm just living off a pension. Immediately, like when that line came up, I was like, that's not a nothing line. You better remember that.
Right. Turns out the relationship between Mace, Angela Bassett, and Lenny is a little bit more complicated. Mace occasionally drives Lenny places, but they have this history from when Lenny was a cop. Lenny stepped in basically when her boyfriend was arrested on drug charges and was the first man that actually sat down and comforted Mace's son.
Right, kind of distracted him from what was good. They're like reading a storybook or something.
Yeah.
When we see it. We see that very late in the movie.
It's a great flashback. It's like the best moment of Bassett acting in the entire movie when she comes home and discovers that he's been arrested.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's big acting, capital B, capital A, but it's Angela Bassett. Like, she fucking sells it 100%. But I like the economy of that flashback. It is, again, one long single take, starting with her outside the house going in and then revealing Lenny with her son. And then that's it. It's like, okay, we get it.
Well, it's really the first indication in the entire movie that Lenny might be a good guy.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, Lenny is a scumbag.
Oh, absolutely. Which is very typical for these kind of, noir characters. They're tarnished gold, so to say.
They're fallen angels. City of fallen angels,
Exactly. So when eventually, after we have this big, hour of setting up the world and all the characters and what their relationships are, the murder comes across Lenny's table. He finally finds this thing that Iris was trying to get him. Well, no, not that. He gets left.
A clip when he goes to Philo Gant's club to see Faith sing. And this clip contains somebody wearing a squid that is killing and sexually assaulting Iris. And so it's a blackjack clip. It's a snuff film of Iris's murder. this sets off the basic detective story for the film. And this is an hour in, so we've already had like a huge chunk of the movie. So here's where it all kicks off. I don't have a whole lot of notes about this section of the film because it's basically about following clues.
Well, I definitely want to talk about Iris's murder.
Okay.
It's really tough. Like it's it's intense, and you made a really good notice in that it is clearly drawing upon giallo influence of, you know, seeing the hands of the killer, being in their POV. But this is an extended sequence of a woman being sexually assaulted and murdered.
It is, and it's directed by a woman.
It is. I'm not trying to neg on it because
I just wanted to make sure that that people know that like this is about sexual violence against women in a way that wants to portray it not as fluff in the story, but as genuine horror.
Well, and everybody across the board has to continually say, like, this guy is a psycho. He is sick. And even when they start to think about, oh, wait, well, maybe this guy has some ulterior motive, maybe there's a deeper conspiracy, they still have to reiterate, even if that's the case, this guy is a sicko.
Yeah. So earlier in the movie, after Mace and Max meet up with Lenny, his car gets towed. That's actually how we find out that Mace is like his driver part of the time. And so they figure out that Iris had said something to Lenny about, let me go put something in your car or I'll meet you up by your car. So they track down Lenny's car and turns out there is a clue in there that talks about what happened to Iris and why Iris was hunted down by these two cops earlier in the movie, Vincent D'Onofrio and William Fichtner. Yeah,
who have been kind of popping up intermittently in this first hour. You know, we obviously see them chasing Iris and we're like, okay, what is their connection to this? And Iris has left this clip for Lenny and he watches it. And this is the one time in the movie where we don't initially see what the clip is. And that's good dramatic buildup.
Absolutely.
So, you know, Lenny watches it and we just see him putting the squid thing on and taking it off. And Mace, Angela Bassett, has never worn a squid before. And she's like, okay, so what is it? He's like, you have to see it. Like I can't tell you. So it's like, oh man, what is this? I'm sorry. I like that he says like, I'm sorry, this is your first clip, which is a good line. And we then see what really is the big secret that's been going on. And it is a recording that Iris had when she was out on a night with Jericho 1. And he was stopped at a random traffic stop by D'Onofrio and Fichtner and was taken out and put on the ground and talking about his rights and arguing like, why you're stopping me, and hey, I'm going to put you in one of my new songs. And the cops execute him and everybody else in the car except Iris.
Yeah, it's Vincent D'Onofrio's character that's the one that actually shoots him. And I mean, it's an execution style killing. Jericho's down on his knees.
Again, long take. I mean, there's definitely a couple moments, because whenever there's whip pans in POV sequences, I just assume cuts.
Right. It's usually there to hide a cut. And I assume they put whip pans in there to, you know, as often as they could without it looking weird, so that they had plenty of opportunities to make splices where they needed to. Mm-hmm. It's good technique. It's really great technique.
It's very good, especially considering the time it was made in. Like nowadays, it's much easier to hide those seams. But this does it pretty flawlessly. But this extended bit with Jericho 1 getting executed, it plays out, and it's very clear that this is commenting on the Rodney King tape.
Yeah.
And obviously now, removed from its release at the time, this is something that we as a society have seen countless times.
This movie is openly, brazenly, unabashedly political. It is pretty different from your standard noir film, which is really only concerned with its own little mystery. This is trying to be a really big social commentary movie on top of that noir. The whole reason that Iris was recording that night, or the whole reason that Iris was even out with Jericho, is because Philo Gant, Michael Wincott's record executive character, wanted to spy on Jericho 1. So that's the whole reason that exists. Like there's all these little tight connections between these characters. It's a very tangled web in this movie. It's a big chunk of plot.
But it's never convoluted. I mean, we learn a lot of information in a big exposition dump by Faith, because we find out that the reason she's been so cold and pushing Lenny away is because she doesn't want him to get involved, because she knows what's on the tape. Philo knows what's on the tape, and she's trying not to get Lenny involved in this because she knows it's only going to end badly. And there's a scene in the third act where she just pretty much, spills the beans on everything that's been going on, which some people might see as like, oh, that's lazy. But I'm like, yeah, but again, that's very archetypically noir.
Yes. There's also, before it's revealed that these two cops were the guys that killed Jericho, these two cops show up again to chase Mace and Lenny around. There's a really great action sequence in a limousine where they're getting chased by these cops, and the cops end up setting fire to the limousine, and the limousine has to go off the end of a pier and into the water and stuff like that. It's a really great scene. All
of that, I mean, we haven't really talked much about Bigelow's direction beyond the POV shots. It's all really great. I mean, I don't think Bigelow has ever been. She's another one of those directors that's not obviously flashy a lot with her direction, but she knows how to frame things for their best, not only their best impact, but it's not just point and shoot.
Right.
More so, the lighting in this movie is so good.
The lighting is incredible, but like that stuff where the car chase is going on and Fichtner is leaning out the passenger's window of that pickup truck and like firing a fully automatic assault rifle at this limousine. It's like, damn, they did a lot of that for real.
Mm-hmm.
Like it really hits. Like, the stunt work in that scene is super, super impressive. Really, really great filmmaking. But I think, one of the stars of the film is the lighting. I mean, the lurid, extreme saturation of the lighting in this film is like overwhelming at times.
I like that the movie didn't try to be super futuristic-y and like, yeah, not a whole lot's going to change in terms of architecture and vehicles and all this stuff like we usually do with sci-fi, but the lighting makes things feel like the future.
Yeah, that's the one thing that kind of separates it from a recognizable 1999. Like, it really does feel more like a cyberpunk film with that lighting.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's not truly cyberpunk, it's more tech-noir.
Mm-hmm. But eventually all of these plot threads finally come together towards the end. And of course it's on New Year's Eve and there's a big celebration going on, and circumstances have them coming to funny enough, the hotel, the LA Bonaventure, which is the hotel I stayed in the first time I ever went out to LA. So every time I see that in LA movies, I'm always like, oh, it's also like a very stereotypically futuristic looking building, because it's like, oh, the elevators are all on the outside and they're these big giant glass tubes.
It's so cinematic.
Yeah. Oh, it's super cinematic.
That's the only time I ever see exterior elevators is because I watch movies like Captain America Winter Soldier, Avengers Endgame, the Hobbs and Shaw, the freaking Girl in the Spider's Web. Like, every time I see an elevator on the exterior of a building, it's in a movie. I don't know if I believe they actually exist yet. We'll see.
No, yeah, I've been in one. You have to ride those things in the Bonaventure, and I hate heights, so it freaked me the hell out.
Anyway, New Year's Eve is important because the whole film essentially feels like a countdown to New Year's Eve. Jericho 1, who has been this like leading activist in the racial tensions in Los Angeles, has said that in Y2K, there's going to be an uprising. And basically he marks it as like, as soon as midnight happens, like shit is going to go down. And that countdown, pretty much might as well be on screen the entire time. Like, that's the big, big source of tension. So now that they have this clip of Jericho's death, they know that if it gets to the media, it could cause riots big enough that they could see the smoke from Canada. I forget which character says that. It might be Tom Sizemore's character.
Well, I'm glad that they have a discussion. Like, it's basically Max, Lenny, and Mace. After they all know what's on the clip, they have a discussion about what should we do? And Mace is very much like, we need to show this to people. Like, this needs to be out there.
Yeah, people deserve to know the truth.
Right.
Is her philosophy.
And Max says those statements about like, this will start a war. And Mace says like, well, maybe we need a war. And I like that the movie at least presents both sides of the argument.
Well, it basically says, like, I think what a lot of people are feeling today, and that the system is broken and it needs a full uprooting. That is, that, and I can understand that from a standpoint of, like, being subjected to systemic oppression and that deep inherited anger you inherit from generations upon generations of people who are oppressed. So I love that there are multiple viewpoints to discuss the moral responsibility of sharing this thing, because it is absolutely incendiary.
Yes, and when we get to this final act, the big climax, the stories diverge in two ways. Basically, Lenny is going to take care of the noir mystery, who is the killer stuff, because they're going to pretty much be in an apartment. Like he's going to go to an apartment to give the tape over, and assuming that it's going to be to the killer.
Right. Well, he believes that Faith is in danger. Like, this is his big dramatic conflict, is he is still head over heels in love with Faith, and believes that now that, he knows that she knows what's going on, that her life is in danger and that she's potentially next. And so he wants to bargain with this potential killer, this person who killed Iris, who we likely believe is Philo Gant. He wants to make sure that Faith lives, and he's willing to trade the tape for that, until Mace makes her case to him.
Right. At this it's the biggest party, the biggest New Year's party, where like all the city muckety mucks are celebrating, and the police commissioner's there. Now, the police commissioner has been seen in one scene before this.
Right.
And it's like Lenny bumps into him while going into a hotel or something. And they have little, like, hey, you kicked me off the force. And the commissioner in one scene is kind of set up as this bastion of moral fortitude. And Lenny tells Mace, give the clip of Jericho 1's murder to him. If there's a single clean cop, it is this guy. And Mace rightfully is like, you're going to ask me to trust him, like to trust the system that allowed this execution to take place and is trying to cover itself up. And Lenny is like, just trust me, just do it. And I think we should concentrate more on wrapping up the noir stuff before we get back to that plot thread.
Sure. At this point, Lenny goes to meet whoever he thinks the killer is in this hotel room. And he discovers Philo Gant, who has been sort of neuro-overloaded. Philo, Michael Wincott's character, they've established earlier in the movie that if you experience something crazy enough inside the squid, like, your brain can be essentially overloaded, and while you'll be alive, you're basically permanently wire tripping.
Right. They can like overload the synapse, some technobabble, but basically they can turn the juice up that it fries your brain.
Yes. So Philo Gant is discovered. We know now Philo Gant is not really the killer, because as Lenny is trying to figure out what's going on, who shows up but Max?
Well, he finds another clip.
Yeah.
And watches the clip, and he thinks it's Faith getting attacked by the killer.
See, it's a little convoluted, isn't it?
But no, I think this reveal that the femme fatale has actually been in on the deal the whole time. And we see Max's reveal by him looking in a mirror, and then Philo shows up, and that's when we see him through the tape, putting the squid on him and frying his brain. This is the reveal. Aha, Max, because Max was hired as Faith's bodyguard, and while he was her bodyguard, they developed a romantic relationship, and they were going to get rid of Philo and screw everybody over and run off and whatever.
So Max does succeed in getting rid of Philo Gant, because not only does he fry his brain, he then shoots him in the head.
To frame Lenny. The idea is like, we need to have a fall guy, and it's going to be you, Lenny, because you're the ex-boyfriend who keeps showing up to the club and being violent and trying to attack Faith. So we're going to set this all up on you.
The orchestration of this, by the way, is nothing short of preposterous, but the movie's doing such a good job of setting it all up that you're wrapped up in it.
Well, this is beach paperback plot twisty stuff.
Super pulpy, yeah.
Yes, and I'm okay with that, because everybody's acting the parts, everybody's clearly on the same wavelength, and when everything breaks down and they have to have the final big fight scene, it's all very dynamic. They get to... There's this running joke throughout the movie about Lenny, because Lenny loves to wear expensive suits and come off as a guy of who lives a life of luxury with fine clothes and everything. And one of the running jokes is his ties. And Max even, makes comments about like his ties. And we learn that Max is colorblind because of the bullet that he took when he was working as a police officer. And we see that in the tapes of the killer, that there's like this kind of blue hue over whatever the killer's recording, which at first you don't understand that. You're just like, oh, that's okay.
It just looks like a stylized night scene, but then they figure out that it's actually a certain type of colorblindness.
Right. And Max's line's like, or Lenny says, like, I didn't know you were colorblind. And Max says, it's the only way I could stand your ties. And this is a kind of cute little joke, but it ends up playing a part in the final fight sequence.
During the fight sequence, Lenny is stabbed in the back, literally, and he manages to haul Max outside and dangle him over the balcony. And of course, what does Max grab onto? Lenny's fucking ties. You have this very, very big, like almost like Tim Burton's Batman type moment.
I was thinking of what's the Alfred Hitchcock movie where they're fighting on the Statue of Liberty, like on the torch.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, it certainly reminds me of the end of North by Northwest, of course.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
But Lenny manages to reach around to his back, take the knife out, and slash his own tie off so that Max plummets to his death. I'm sure a couple people downstairs partying were really alarmed when he hit that car.
He hits the car, and nobody, there's like that, like I think gunshots are being fired later in the other plot thread we'll talk about, and everybody's still celebrating the new year.
Well, I love that image of him dead on top of the car, and the confetti is just sort of snowing down on him. It's such a well shot movie and full of really beautiful, beautiful images all the way through.
But while all this is going on, Mace has approached the commissioner in the bathroom and is telling him, "You need to watch this. This is."
She just busts into the men's room while this dude's at a urinal, and she's like, "Hey, you need to watch this. You need to watch this snuff movie."
Dude, whatever. Like, it's Angela Bassett. That's the Queen of Wakanda right there. Like
that's true.
She can bust into a men's bathroom and demand that somebody watch a snuff film anytime. Like, I believe it.
That is the best fake Tina Turner there ever was.
But no, so she's, you need to watch this. And of course, the commissioner dismisses her and is like, I should arrest you for even having that illegal equipment. Get out of here.
And what are you doing in the men's room?
Well, no, it doesn't get that ridiculous. But Mace says, like, I knew it. I knew this is what was going to happen. And at this moment, I'm like, I know where this movie's going, and I'm on board. It is that she tried going the proper channels. It didn't work. She is going to play this tape on these giant screens that they have been showing a ton during this final sequence. They're, playing like, 2000 woo party stuff. And people are like filming in the crowd. There's a deleted scene actually of Ralph Fiennes and Mace, the way they get into the building. They like get through a media crowd that's shooting or like a bunch of media people that are shooting the crowd, and they get on camera and their faces end up on the big screen. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, okay. She's going to find some way to play the tape on this big screen and show it to everybody. And this is going to be ta-da. But before I thought that was going to happen, Vincent D'Onofrio and William Fichtner show back up, and they're trying to get to her. And Vincent D'Onofrio is just shooting people in the crowd left and right, trying to shoot her. It's horrific.
Oh, it is. And yeah, they make Vincent D'Onofrio's character like the most despicable villain they absolutely can. Like the just worst asshole psycho killer cop.
They take it to a point that I think is offensively cartoonish.
Offensive to whom? I don't know. I mean, it's a movie villain in a really, really pulpy story. So if a cop is going to be corrupt in a story like this, they're going to take it all the way.
They are, but I think that we got the point. But at the end, when with his dying breath, he has to call Angela Bassett the N-word. It's like, no, really? He's racist? I can't believe it.
No way.
Yeah.
I mean, the movie goes so extreme in this third act. Like, Angela Bassett manages to knock him out, and she handcuffs him to William Fichtner, and then handcuffs the both of them to this like structure outside. And then the commissioner, the big white savior, closes in and says, "Arrest these men. They've done a bad." And so the cops surround them all. And so, of course, William Fichtner and Vincent D'Onofrio, they both kind of wake up out of their daze, and they find themselves handcuffed. And what does Bill Fichtner's character do? He takes his own gun out of his holster and blows his own head off, causing this huge blood splash on Vincent D'Onofrio's face. I'm like, this flick is fucking nuts.
It's not. I mean, it goes pretty Verhoeven in these last few minutes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, not nearly as like wackily cartoonish as like Verhoeven, not like Emil getting splattered by that van.
No, I
but
mean,
still, for this movie, it's extreme.
It's extreme, and it's certainly trying to get, and that's when Vincent D'Onofrio is able to break free of the cuffs or whatever and tries to shoot Mace, and then he gets gunned down. And I realized at this moment that this feels like a script that Bradley Whitford's character from Get Out would write.
Yeah, no, it's really, really self-congratulatory, you know, having two white guys credited as the screenwriters for this film. And in the end, they're depending on the kindness of this, you know, white-haired white dude, this big authority figure who, of course, is the one good guy in the corrupt police force. They're depending on him to make everything okay. It would almost feel better if that guy were actually a real character in the film and not just this mannequin that shows up earlier.
Right. I mean, that
the
ending
fact that he's like a fucking nobody is like, what?
Well, that's the thing. Maybe that ending would feel earned if he was more of if we saw why he has this moral fortitude, or if, you know, if they even directly reference something like Rodney King, like, or even just being like, you know, this isn't the LA that, you know, this isn't the LAPD that, you know, I've, you know, cleaned this place up. There are no dirty cops on my watch. Like anything, because I really felt the ending was going to be way more radical. And it feels like such a radical movie that this ending where the bad guys die right there, and then everybody still counts the clock down to midnight and celebrates, and Lenny and Mace kiss as we have, you know, a crane shot. I'm like, this is not the same movie I was watching.
Right. So here's where we kind of come around to final assessments. I think about 2 hours of this movie are real great. I think it's a little hard to follow, and I can immediately see why it didn't do well at the box office.
Oh, of course.
It's a little hard to follow in that it's convoluted, but explains itself well enough. Doesn't really provide any shortcuts to the audience. It really makes them wait for every development. And it's not boring by any means, but it's maybe a little bit tougher and a little bit more fibrous than a sci-fi mystery movie was at the time, you know, for something that was supposed to be a crowd pleaser.
Well, I mean, I have to imagine that the marketing leaned heavily on James Cameron and probably Kathryn Bigelow. And this is by no means a widely accessible movie. It is hard R. It is grungy. It is dirty.
Very classically noir pulp.
It is. Oh, for sure. But
it's not terribly in fashion for popular films in the mid-90s.
No, but also it is attempting to be incendiary and blatantly political, which is always going to be a point of contention.
Big turnoff for a huge number of people.
Exactly. And it's a 2.5 hour movie. And I didn't really feel a lot of the movie's length. That actually wasn't as big of an issue for me as I thought it was going to be. And I think like 90% of Strange Days is good to great.
Yeah.
Like exceedingly so. And then that 10%, I really hate to be, because we've talked about this a lot, about how endings can sour audiences so much on a movie that they forget, you know, they only remember that last minute instead of the, you know, 2 hours they just spent really liking the movie.
Right. They have to walk out on a really good feeling. And if they don't, they think the entire movie is bad.
And that's the thing. Like Strange Days tries to do that by walking out on a good feeling, but that feels disingenuous to everything the movie was building.
Right. So in a transactional sense of what happens, you know, the characters are able to prevent essentially what the movie posits as a race war or a race apocalypse. We have characters saying it multiple times during the movie that it feels like the end of the world.
Well, and here's the thing too. I mean, even though Angela Bassett's character is there, and that's great, and it gives a perspective, I think you were right when we were discussing this. It feels very directly like a white man's apocalypse.
Right. It's sort of a conservative nightmare.
Yes.
It really does feel like the movie is trying to set up this anxiety of the black people are going to take over. Not
that they're going to take over, that they're going to destroy everything.
Right.
And that's like that overarching terror, even though we have Angela Bassett to at least present, like, no, understand things from their perspective. And I think the movie thinks it's being sympathetic to that side of the argument, but its perspective is so skewed in one direction.
Well, it tries to make Jericho unsympathetic. Like Jericho is kind of unknowable, and he just kind of plays as like a thug for people to be scared of. Like he's representative of this black apocalypse.
I wouldn't use the word thug.
Well, I mean, I think that's from certain perspectives in the film, that's absolutely true.
Well, I think it's like, in a way, he is only ever portrayed as aggressive and militant.
Except for when he's palling around with a couple of hookers and driving around.
Sure, but that feeds into the whole like luridness of the movie and how we're supposed. It's like we're not supposed. Like the movie doesn't want you to advocate those things, but obviously you're enticed by them because we're enticed by luridness.
Sure.
And I think Jericho, because we only ever see him in, news clips, like yelling directly at the camera and being angry all the time. I just wish that there was more perspective, not only obviously on the filmmaker side, that there was, somebody, a person of color that could add some insight into this. But even if there wasn't, if they attempted more to show things from that angle and not because the movie is just kind of liberally sympathetic to that stuff without really trying to understand it.
Right. And what the ending exposes is that the movie has essentially bitten off way more than it could chew. Mm-hmm. Because by the end of the film, what have they done? They have potentially averted a crisis, and maybe New Year's will go better than planned. Maybe. It still is uncertain where the narrative goes from here. It really doesn't give us much indication of what's going to happen in this world from this point. So there's a lot left unresolved. And it's not like this film is going to be, something that was set up for a sequel or franchise potential. It's just not that kind of movie. It's a one and done, a normal movie. So having Lenny and Max resolve their unresolved romantic tension in that moment feels like, well, who gives a shit about that? Wasn't the world going to end?
Right. Well, it's funny. The world could only be LA in a movie. It posits LA is the world.
Right. But I mean, people are talking about this in the movie in no uncertain terms. I think Max several times talks about it essentially as a potential apocalypse.
Yes. It is framed that way, which again is very Los Angeles conceited, because we never really get a greater picture of what's going on in the rest of the country. Like it's very localized to LA.
Right.
And again, it's because of all the topical stuff this movie's trying to draw upon and comment on. And I applaud it for its attempt. But at the end of the day, I think it's way more successful. And I was going to say it wants to be more successful at the noir stuff, but I think it really wants to be, making a statement and being bold with its racial commentary. But when Commissioner White Savior comes in and everything's hunky-dory and we can kiss and the new year's going to be okay, I'm like,
The movie is patting itself on the back at that point for like, did you solve racism?
Right. It really does feel a bit like that. Like we averted, racism. And that sucks.
They basically diffused the bomb that could ignite the race war.
Yes.
And that is like so idealistic. And, like maybe this is like hindsight 2020, but like how many videos have we seen now of policemen murdering unarmed black men?
We have to talk about this because this is what the movie's talking about.
Right.
It posits that like if this video got out, it would destroy systems. And in 2019, it's really hard to buy into that because we're like, dude, that's a Tuesday. And that's sad. Yeah. Like it's sad.
It's extraordinarily tragic.
I'm not trying to make it seem trite, in hindsight.
Right. And I'm sorry for getting so heavy, but this is literally what the movie's about. So
it's impossible to avoid.
Yeah. The movie is both prescient and quaint in that way, it's dealing with these things where it's like, wow, you thought that was what this is going to be like. Well,
it ain't.
I also find it like, from the technological side, getting away from the race stuff, from the technological side, it was also prescient about how we would use digital video experiences to help with our emotions as a drug, essentially.
Well, yeah.
We're not really using it for the adrenaline rush anymore. Like maybe that's sort of a comment on action cinema, but really action cinema isn't giving us that sort of huge adrenaline rush. I started to think about the way people use like, YouTube videos and ASMR to help
Yes.
lessen their anxiety symptoms and stuff like that. I'm like, that is video as the drug. Like, people want to chill. People need to chill.
Well, no, it's when you talk about that kind of prescience, it's about the vicariousness that we get through newer forms of technology. Like, I like that this movie realizes that any new technology is immediately going to get co-opted for pornography.
Certainly.
The history of technology is intrinsically tied into the history of pornography.
It's all entertainment. It's titillation. And if people can sort of use that experience to live vicariously through another person, of course porn's going to get involved.
Right. And so the things that I feel that it's prescient about when you're talking about like YouTube videos and things like that, it is the idea of entertainment. It no longer is cathartic. It is just vicarious.
Right.
It is just experiencing these things directly to you. And of course, in this movie, because they are actual recorded memories, that's kind of the fantastic element. But it's like, yeah, you can pull up a video of this stuff right now on your phone and try and zone out. And I think it's assuming the evolution, because they have to comment about movies in this movie. Faith says, like, you know why movies are better than playbacks, as they call the clips? That's another one of their lingos for them. She's like, because the credits come up and you know it's over.
Right. And what I thought so interesting is that the movie is not at all a critique of capitalism, like so much cyberpunk is.
Yeah, because it's not
talking
cyberpunk.
About important. Well, I mean, it's cyberpunk adjacent. It's close enough to cyberpunk that we should examine it from that kind of perspective.
It has cyberpunk aesthetic and kind of flavoring,
and certainly similarities, but like, it's talking about a really powerful technology that is affecting people in a potentially negative way. And because this is not a critique of capitalism, the product is not a consumer product. It's not talking about what companies are providing to consumers. It's a black market thing. And I actually think it's kind of naive to realize that a technology like this wouldn't be available to consumers from a company. Like, we now know, like, another thing in sort of hindsight is like, of course, there would be a lot of dangerous technology available to us that wouldn't immediately or apparently be so dangerous. We now know that Facebook is pure poison.
Sure. Well, and wrapping this into our VR and how this is a very different type of VR that we're talking about, because obviously we have, like, VR is completely consumer grade now. And this posits an idea that not only will VR be purely fabricated entertainment or something, or a simulation, because these aren't simulations. They are real memories. They are real things. And that's where I think that prescience in Strange Days really works, because with the proliferation of stuff like YouTube video and things that are trying to be as interactive and direct with the audience as possible, it's crossing that fourth wall and getting closer and closer to not being simulation.
Right. Kind of makes me think about gameplay videos where people will just watch people play video games,
right,
rather than play the video games themselves. There is sort of a living vicariously aspect to that.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And all this to say, I recommend Strange Days. I actually recommend it pretty strongly.
Same here. The ending kind of sucks, but yeah.
well, it's not that it kind of sucks. It's that I recommend it very strongly because everybody involved, the time that it's made, the way that it's like, this is a clout movie. This is something that also derailed Kathryn Bigelow for a long time.
Yeah, well, I mean, she was thought of as kind of a commercial filmmaker, and this was not a commercial film.
No, she was a bit of a pariah for quite a while, and obviously she's come back with a vengeance and is still kicking ass. But Strange Days, this is a director's cut movie, like it's, which we talk about on the show before, where it's like, it feel not just because of its length, but it lets things play out. It is a vision. Like, I see the vision behind what they're trying to do. And I see their classic love of pulpy, tawdry, noir crime fiction, which is stuff I like too. And I think all of that is true to its inspirational material and successful. I just wish the bigger things that it has on its mind, which I like that it has those things on its mind, and it's attempting to tackle these kind of big issues of the time, and unfortunately still of our time. I just wish it didn't fumble that ball so hard. It could have wobbled a little bit, and I think I wouldn't be as cross with the movie, but it outright drops it so bad.
Right. And I don't think it really ever had hope of being able to tie that huge chunk of social commentary up in a nice bow.
No, it needed to be more ambiguous.
It either needed to be more ambiguous or the whole movie needed to be less ambitious.
Right. Yes, exactly. That's a perfect read on it. It either needed to strip itself down to just being more focused on its noir stuff, or it really needed to leave. Like, it should have left. If I kept thinking that the ending was going to be that Angela Bassett played the clip on the TVs and the crowd went silent and watched this whole thing and reacted, and that was it. Like, the movie was just going to end there. We didn't know if people were going to start rioting and destroying things. It was just going to end and just leave you like, was it the lady or the tiger? Like, what happened?
Yeah.
But because it tries to wrap everything up in a nice classical bow,
Yeah, well, I mean, that ending that you're talking about would have been almost like a Doctor Strangelove kind of ending.
Right.
Or maybe even a Watchmen kind of ending.
Well, yeah, I just leaving the audience with well, now you got to figure out this problem when you walk out those doors, because that's what you're walking into.
Right. Well, you know what movie did manage to do that really, really well is Black Klansman.
Mm-hmm.
And it leaves you walking out of the theater clutching your gut because it fucking punched you real hard. But the movie is a political punch. Can't really put a bow on that and make it sound, genuine.
I think that's also why we're having trouble segueing into the shelf, because it's like there's no bow just to put on this movie. But at the end of the day, I still really recommend it. It's it's one of those movies that you're like, I can't believe they were able to make this. Like, I can because of the clout they had, but good Lord.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It certainly merits recommendation. It should be on a really nice Blu-ray somewhere.
Yeah, right.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Criterion Collection picks up something like this. It really is such a stylistic marvel and really does deserve a really great 4K scan.
Yeah, and a reappraisal and an analysis of its place in film history and contemporary film. Like, I totally agree. Like, even though I'm not crazy about the movie, like you would assume, it's like, well, if it's going to be a Criterion, then it must be an absolute pinnacle of cinema. It's like, no, I just really think this is a movie that deserves heavy examination and appraisal.
Right. It's important. I think it's certainly an important film, and certainly important enough to merit reappraisal in today's landscape. And if you wanted to pull another movie off of the shelf to pair with it, or perhaps to make a substitution, what would you pull off the shelf, Drew?
Well, when we do this, we always want to encourage our listeners to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode and submit their own shelf picks. We love hearing those every week. Well, I was going to say, if you want a science fiction movie that is centered around a New Year's celebration that is blatantly political and dealing with ideas about class and structure and a potential uprising, you should watch Snowpiercer. Snowpiercer is not a movie I've revisited since I saw it in the theater, because, and I think I mentioned this when you talked about Splice last week on Existenz, which is another one. I haven't come back to it because one time with that movie really sunk in for me.
Yeah, same with Snowpiercer. I've only seen it once, but there's some stuff in Snowpiercer that made such an impression on me that's like,
I can't forget it.
I really do hesitate to revisit it because it's pretty nutty and pretty powerful.
Yeah, it's stuff that I can't forget. Like, it is emblazoned on my memory. And I think Snowpiercer handles its bigger class debate and struggle in a much more definitive and still, it's a hopeful ending, but it's also a destructive one.
Yes.
And I think combats its ideas about systemic oppression in a both cathartic and difficult way. Plus, it's fucking great. Like, it's just such an entertaining piece of action sci-fi cinema, and it's goofy and weird and idiosyncratic and brilliant. I really think it's a brilliant movie. And I think there's a television show that's coming out soon on TNT of all channels.
I had heard about that for a couple years, and I had heard it was happening, but I haven't seen it yet, and I won't believe it till I see it.
Well, it's been in production, and they already renewed it for season 2.
No shit.
So it's happening. And I'm interested because it's it was based off a comic book, a long running comic book. And it's a fascinating idea in terms of using that kind of sci-fi construct to examine society. And I think Strange Days was trying to do that, but it gets a little too giddy about its noir stuff. And Snowpiercer is able to balance its more straightforward genre elements with its social commentary. So Snowpiercer, if you've never seen it, huge recommendation. And what are you going to pull off the shelf, sir?
Well, if you're looking for a really classical noir set in Los Angeles that came out in the mid-90s, I would certainly recommend that you watch L.A. Confidential.
Yes.
This is the 1997 prestige adaptation of the James Ellroy novel, also called L.A. Confidential. It stars Kevin Spacey, Russell Crowe, Guy Pearce, James Cromwell, David Strathairn, Kim Basinger, Danny DeVito, among others. Fuck Kevin Spacey.
Yeah, I was like, you led with Kevin Spacey. Jesus.
Well, he's top billed, unfortunately, but
he is? Really?
Yeah.
That's weird.
It is, but that's the way the cookie crumbled back in 1997.
I guess. I mean, fuck Kevin Spacey, but I only saw LA Confidential for the first time last year on the recommendation of my coworker Lauren Galloway, who's awesome, because it just came up in conversation. I was like, oh yeah, I've never seen it, and she was like, I will give you a copy of it. You need to watch this movie. It is pretty much like you're saying. I think it's the high watermark for. It's got to be like the one great noir film from the 90s. Yep.
Directed by Curtis Hanson. He also did some work on the screenplay. The majority of the screenplay work, as far as adaptation, comes from Brian Helgeland, who did, Mystic River and also Nightmare on Elm Street for the Dream Master.
Mm-hmm. Which we did an episode on.
Yeah, he was one of the bigger names that got his start in horror. Anyway, that is all I have to pull off the shelf.
Well, then let's do some currently consuming.
Nom, 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
I'm going to talk about one thing. I'm not going to spend a long time on it because I hated it.
You were pretty raw with this one.
Sorry, Mom, but my mom wanted to go see a movie for Mother's Day, and the movie she wanted to go see was The Hustle. So my family and I went to go see The Hustle. I bought tickets for us to go see The Hustle, which, if you don't know, is a remake of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels starring Rebel Wilson and Anne Hathaway. This is the worst studio comedy I've seen in years. It is excruciatingly bad.
You are not one for hyperbole, so when you say that, I believe you.
Well, I don't watch a whole lot of studio comedies. Like, I only watch studio comedies these days when they come at like really high recommendation, like Blockers. Blockers was great.
Or like Game Night.
Game Night was real good. Yeah, absolutely. But like otherwise, I tend to kind of steer clear of most studio comedies, and this is why. Oh my God.
Well, it just, I mean, we're not going to spend too much time, but I can, and obviously you survived it and I have not seen it, but it just looked like the most cookie cutter, bland studio comedy. And it also, I'm getting very, very tired of a certain kind of improv movie, like where you can, like, it's fine if you can tell if people are improving, but there's times when, as a director, you need to know when to rein certain performers in. And I'm saying this like, I'm sure it happens even with people who became famous for this, like the Apatow group, like people like Will Ferrell and stuff. And it just seemed to me like that's what that movie was going to be so much of.
Well, here's the thing. This is a Rebel Wilson film. She not only stars in the film, but she's also one of the producers on the film. Mm-hmm. And she is named PGA. Stands for Producers Guild of America. But basically what that credit denotes in opening credits these days is like, this is one of the producers that really worked on developing the film.
Right.
So this was a Rebel Wilson vehicle. So director at this point is working for the producer. So there you have it.
Yeah. I mean, when if you see a PGA on like a producer credit, they're basically kind of an executive producer in terms of the clout they have on the production.
Well, executive producer in film can mean any number of things. Like on television, executive producer is a much bigger deal. Like, but that credit executive producer can mean any number of things on a film.
Yes, it can be honorific. It can, just be kind of, I mean, like, trust me, Christopher Nolan didn't do shit with Man of Steel, and he's an executive producer on that.
Sure, but like when you see Kevin Feige's name on a Marvel film, that's Kevin Feige PGA. Like he was the guy who developed that thing. Like that was his brainchild. So that's how that credit works. So thanks, Rebel.
Well, I do. Okay. I will say I've seen Rebel Wilson. Like, I've seen 2 of the Pitch Perfect movies, I think.
I've seen her be funny. You know what I mean? Like, I've laughed at some things that she's done.
She's good in Pain and Gain. Like, I don't want this just as soon as like, oh, Rebel Wilson. It's like, she is not inherently bad, but
no. Woof,
did that stuff look tough in trailers.
You thought it was bad in trailers. You should have seen the fucking movie, bro.
No, I shouldn't have.
Anyway, what have you been currently consuming?
Real quick, I saw John Wick 3. Perineum or whatever.
Drew be nimble, Drew be quick.
Yeah.
Drew saw John Wick 3, Chapter 3, Parabellum 3.
Yes.
John Wick Chapter 3, Paramecium.
we were, I think, doing a couple of those.
Peritoneum. Perineum.
Perineum's my favorite. Yeah. Look that one up. So I think Travis and I don't know if I think we talked about it at some point in the show, but you and I weren't as jazzed on Chapter 2 as everybody else seemed to be.
That was kind of a big, unwieldy director's cut of a movie that had plenty of cool stuff in it, but I felt like really lacked economy.
Absolutely. John Wick 3 gets things back because John Wick 2 had, I think, maybe 2 movies worth of a story that it was trying to tell. And one part of that story is, hey, wouldn't it be cool if a bunch of other John Wicks went after John Wick? And that mostly gets done in that movie through a montage of like assassins trying to get him. Well, that's what John Wick 3 is completely built around from the word go. It is literally counting down like the last 20 minutes before he's considered excommunicado and everybody can go after him and he's the #1 big bounty. And it's great. Like, I mean, all the stuff that people like about the John Wick movies, you know, the action choreography, the slick cinematography, the gorgeous saturated colors and contrast, which so many lens flares in this movie. Like, visually, man, it looks pretty good. These movies have always looked good, and I think they've only looked better as each movie goes on. This movie's real good. I definitely like it a lot more than Chapter 2. I think it's the longest movie too, but it feels more streamlined because fast forward like 10 seconds if you think this might be kind of spoilery. I'm not going to spoil it, but I think this comment might be misconstrued that way. This movie does a better job of exploring the mythology of this world by kind of dismantling it.
Huh. Okay.
And that is more inherently more interesting from a conflict perspective for the character John Wick, and is a better way to explore the world. And I think it does a much better job at that. This movie also has a phenomenal villain played by Mark Dacascos. He's great. He's fun. He's funny. He's kind of like a John Wick fan. And that's the reason he wants to kill him. Like, because he admires him so much. He's great. He's so good. Every time he's on screen, he steals the show.
It's good. Last time I saw him in anything other than a television show was Brotherhood of the Wolf. So it's nice to see Dacascos back and kicking Ascos.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people love Chapter 2, but I know you and I were both kind of about it. I think Chapter 3 brings things back. I am a little uneven about the way the movie ends because it's another one where it's like, well, this doesn't really feel like an ending. This feels like the setup for the next one.
Well, they're working on a TV show.
This is going to be a movie where they set this up.
All right.
But the conflict that they set up, I was like, oh, I thought this was going to be the conflict of this movie. So, I mean, I'm immediately on board for the next one because it's kind of the idea that the series has been unknowingly building towards. But it's really good. The action is super violent. You get both villains, I think some of the main villains from the Raid 1 and 2 in an extended fight scene with John Wick, and it's glorious.
Sounds dope. I'm going to have to see this.
I actually think you'll have a much better time than with Part 2.
Okay.
So, John Wick. And then let's check out the comment of the week on our Existenz episode. We actually want to highlight 2 comments. One from Tim Brennan, who said, excellent episode as usual, guys. It's been a minute since I've seen Existenz, and I'm planning to fix that presently. Good, Tim Brennan, because that movie's still rooting around in my head.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about it too.
Yeah, and I've been I was listening to our episode, and I was like, oh man, I'm thinking about more stuff about it. Like, it's coming to my brain. I think Existenz might be a keeper.
Maybe. I actually had a coworker say to me today, he goes, "Oh, I saw you guys put Existence up in your feed." He said, "I had to watch that movie for school." And I thought, really?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because loyal listener Eric Fuchs mentions that he's been listening to a podcast called Game Studies Study Buddies. Whew, I can't believe I got that in one go. That's a tongue twister. By Cameron Kunzelman and Michael Lutz. And it's about academic game studies, and they read this book, and it's all this very, very academic stuff about approach to game design and everything. And they mention Existenz in one of the episodes of the podcast, and they talk about it in regards to game theory. And this is kind of an academics movie in a way that I think Eric's getting to. But it's still, Existenz is real good, y'all. But I also wanted to highlight Eric's shelf pick because he gave us a shelf pick, which we always like. And he said, Inland Empire, if you want a movie commenting about the nature of acting role play with the very fabric of reality shifting and collapsing in horrifying ways, Inland Empire. Also, it's directed by a dude named Dave. I've never seen Inland Empire.
Yeah, me neither. This is one Lynch film I have just not seen. I hear it's one of his most inaccessible.
Yeah, it's been very divisive, even in people that I've seen that really love Lynch. So Eric's got me interested. I might have to finally bite that bullet. So yeah, I think that's going to do.
Funny you said bite the bullet talking about Existenz because bullet teeth.
That's true. Yay! Well, next week we're going to wrap up VR month with a versus episode. Always love versus episodes. And this is a doozy. We're going to do The Lawnmower Man versus Gamer. Yes, Gamer, the Gerard Butler starring movie with Michael C. Hall and directed by the guys who made the Crank movies. Whew, buddy. And The Lawnmower Man. The Lawnmower Man. Oh, I'm so excited for that episode. So we'll be wrapping up VR month next week with that. As always, we want to thank you all so much for listening. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on a GenreVision VR month.